Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Nadia Munla. So Nadia is a women's embodiment coach and the founder of Embodied dance classes, Embody as a brand in dance classes. And she's joining us from San Diego. So Nadia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi.
Hey, how did you get interested in the body? What's your story?
Ooh, my story was that I was super disconnected from my body, as I imagine is the case for quite a lot of people who, start to get really passionate about re-embodying in a way, because really we all come into this world super connected to our bodies, and it's usually all these different occurrences and traumas and experiences and messages that start to get us feeling like we need to sort of pull up and out of the sensational, the felt sense experience of being in our bodies. And so for me, I grew up during the war in the civil war in Lebanon. So that on its own, of course, is a way in which, you automatically don't want to be in your body because you don't really want to be in this constant sense of lack of safety, right? When is the next explosion going to happen? So I started life with this sort of contraction in my body. What's going to happen next? And then, it sort of moved into, I also at the same time, although I was living in the Civil War, had a very, fun, typical childhood. And one of the things I loved to do my dream was to become a ballerina. I was like, I need the tutu. It's very important. And so I started dancing really early on and training with the idea of like going professional. And by the time I hit 8, so not that far in, basically what happened was I had some problems with my knees, and my teacher was like, oh, by the way, there's no way that you can go on point and do this professionally. And so this was sort of that first instance where I felt like my body was against me. My body was the obstacle to my dreams. And so that just it just continued, then I got into my teenage years, and then I had to deal with issues around my femininity and my erotic energy and how that was unsafe. And then I got into like a lot of physical conditions. I had 2 ulcers at the age of 16. And so I was just in a lot of physical pain as a result of different issues in my body. And so all of these, like they just aggregated on top of each other, I got to my early 20s and I was like, well, the only way to do life is up here. I need to numb out completely and just really focus on my intellect, on my mind. And of course, the world I lived in revered that. The world I lived in gave me all these like reasons to be totally up here and in my head as opposed to my body. And so I sort of did that for a while. And luckily I burnt out. Whoever says that. But like luckily I burnt out because my body was like, listen, this is not going to work out if you want to keep going until you're 80, 90, 100, who knows. And so I had
You're in Lebanon still at this point.
At this point, I had moved to, I had moved around, but I had left Lebanon after I graduated high school.
Got it. So that's like for British viewers, that's like 18 years old, something like that?
Correct. Yeah. I was 17 going on 18. And I started to travel around. I was in the US for a bit. Then I moved to Canada and sort of was back and forth and pretty nomadic. But essentially at that point, I got into film producing. And film producing also is a very masculine sort of go, go, go. Like you sleep 3 hours a day. Like you live on especially I was doing like indie producing. So it's like really low budget. So you're working with like pizza and burritos and that's about it. So, there was no like, I want my green juice in the morning. People are like, who are you?
Yeah.
And so my body broke down. My body was just like, listen, this is not going to work. And at some point, I just completely switched gears. I closed down my production company. I was working at an advertising agency in New York. I quit that job and I just went into holistic health coaching. So I went and I got certified initially as a holistic health coach. And this was really as a way to start to heal my own body, but then also because I felt like, wow, there must be so many other people out there who are like me, who need help getting themselves reconnected and nourishing and healing their body. But through, the way that I did the health coaching was very much through felt sense. Like, what do we need to do to get you into your body so you can feel what she actually needs? And I say she because I work with women. And so there was really this idea of like, if you actually connect back to your body, I'm not going to tell you how to eat. I don't need you to read a book about paleo or keto or whatever to tell you how to eat. Your body is going to tell us how to eat, how to eat, how to exercise, how
Okay,
much
so I'm
sleep
going to jump in. So there's kind of a fundamentally different approach to holistic health, isn't there? Whether it's diet or exercise or whatever. One is you impose this regime of certain sleep or certain diet or certain number of weights you have to lift. And another one is actually that more embodied approach of tuning in and going, okay, what do I actually need here?
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, that was really because I had trained before just for fun. It was really just a hobby. On the side, I had trained with a woman named Sheila Kelly, who is the creator of a feminine and sensual movement practice in the US that's called S Factor. And I'd started that while I was still in film producing. But because we learned, she had trained a lot with there's a whole bunch of different things. She sort of is ballerina, but she's also trained with Stanley Kellman, who has done a lot of work in the somatic movement world. And so she brought in a lot of those tools as a way to help us as the teachers work with the bodies of our students and really start to interpret what stories come out of their dances. And so I had been doing that already. And with that, a lot of the tools are working with your senses, your sensuality. And so that naturally just came into my health coaching. And so more and more people were coming to me in the practice, really wanting to connect more to that like sensual piece, with the health being, of course, and, sensual nourishment sort of being, the ultimate goal, but really coming in and being like, I want to get more embodied, connect me to my body again. And out of that sort of grew all the other work that I do, like the embodied dance class and just the different workshops, where really now my primary focus is getting you embodied. One of the things we may do, is the health piece, but really it's more about how do we connect you to your body and work on whatever goals you have.
Got it. So let's kind of track back here, because I think there's a few interesting things to listeners. The pivotal moment really struck out for me, and I read this on your website too. It's like when you feel your body betrayed you, and I forget the exact wording you used, but something along the lines. There's a moment when people get to a point in life, and maybe, I had a female friend say it was when she had her first period, and she was like visibly bleeding, and she was like, "My God, I don't want this." Or it's maybe something in athletics at school that you can't keep up with the race, or you don't get picked for the team, or there's something in your hormones as a teenager, or whatever. I remember once having a hard-on in a classroom and thinking, where the hell has this come from? Oh my God, like my body's doing something that's going to really like die. I'm going to die of embarrassment if I have to stand up. So there's something that happens, like you talked about this sort of erotic side, or just physical development, or athletic, in your case, like, hey, you couldn't do the thing. And for so many people, like sports in school is just an experience of failure. Like most people are failing. And then at some point, people have this moment where they go, oh, maybe my body isn't great. And society is just waiting to support that moment. Because as you say, if you then go to the cognitive, people give you all the kudos for that.
100%. And I think that, this is something that affects, really everyone. It's not specific to women, right? The messages that we get, I work with three primary messages, at least with my women clients, but I think they apply to everyone. And that is the idea that play is unproductive, our sensuality is unsafe, which for for men would be more like their primal, like warrior sexuality. And then
that's now true. Just to be clear, that's entirely true now. Yeah. Next one.
Well, I would love to go. There's a lot of, it's one of the messages that's coming up, right, for the men right now.
Oh, absolutely. I want to hear about the female experience first, because that's your topic, but we could go there. The third one?
Yeah. And the third one is that emotionality is weak.
Right. So emotions are weak. Play is like the opposite of productivity, right? Like there's work and there's play. And if you're playing, you're not producing, and that's all our society wants, is for us to be producers and consumers. And if play is unproductive, it doesn't add anything. It's something for children.
Yeah.
Okay, so wow, we could do a whole podcast on each of those. That's fantastic. Each one of those is like well worth going into. Okay, so let's start with play. So like if play, play. Let me play devil's advocate. Play is for kids. It's good for kids. They learn, but then we move beyond that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, here's the thing. Like a lot of the systems that are at play right now really want just good citizens and productive employees, right? Who don't
Yes.
have their own opinions, who aren't creative, who aren't artistic, who aren't erotic,
Yes.
because all of that stuff is distracting from productivity. And
Uh,
if we get people who are rebelling because they are just so juiced up and excited, whether,
yeah.
because erotic and creative energy
Yeah.
are from the same place, right? It's really second chakra material. And so if you think about people getting turned on by their creativity, by whatever it is, they're not going to be these good citizens and these good
Yeah.
employees. So it doesn't work.
And I could certainly argue that, like, for me, like, play has been massively productive in the sense of, and first of all, production isn't the point of my life. However, even if it were, like this conference we just did was just me and Daniela playing most of the time. I mean, we also had to be serious, but there's a lot of play. My marketing's all about play. Like that's how I find customers, like just from a business point of view. And that's not everything, which is a key message, I think. Like it's still useful to play. And it's the heart of a modern creative online business, I would say.
Yeah. And in Embody, the class that I created, so we work through these 3 different archetypes, each one of which are battling these messages. And of course, the play is unproductive. Who do we conjure up? Our inner child,
Yes.
right? The sense of innocence and like that part of you that is, what I encourage people to do in class is to see, what does it actually feel like? Can you envision and embody what it feels like to be in the body of your 5-year-old self,
Uh-huh.
where you don't have to pay rent, where there aren't the like bills and the worries of being an adult, where there isn't this pressure to like go all the time, where you can just literally delight in the innocence and this raw, like loving energy in you. And
Yeah.
instantly everyone's crying, you know what I mean? Which I
Cry.
think is which is an
You do
indication,
live
I
in
think.
California, to be fair, though. It doesn't take much. I
I
mean,
will say I just moved from New York and they're tougher there. So
they're crying there too in New York. They cry more in California. Is the cliche true, or am I just prejudiced? So, I mean, let me push back against this because, first of all, I'm a big fan of play. You know me, you've heard my podcast. I'm super playful. Anyone that's met me in life or seen me with kids or dogs, I'm Mr. Playful. And what I see in alternative communities is too much play. I see
oh,
play to a degree where I go, okay, you're wasting your life. You need to get serious. Like this sort of infantilized, childish behavior, childish, not childlike, in alternative communities. Like, do people at Burning Man need to learn more play? Of course they fucking don't.
yeah. Great. And why does Burning Man exist? Because we have such an extreme 300 and whatever, 55 days
Yeah.
of the year, we're stuck in a cubicle or wherever. So these people go super all out in the other
Yes.
direction at Burning Man.
It's
And
enabling.
I
Burning
think
Man's enabling.
anyway, Burning Man's a whole nother topic, but I think that the idea is if we can incorporate little bits of our feminine and our masculine, of our doing and our being, of Burning Man and the cubicle, like, because the cubicle, the piece that the only really great thing about a cubicle is that it sits you down and it disciplines you. I mean, there's a reason why in university, right? Like when you go to study for your final exam, like most people go to the library after the whole semester of not paying any attention. They sit in that little cubicle and they're like, I'm going to focus. There's something really great about discipline and
Yeah.
focus.
You need both, right? Yin and yang. It's yin and yang. And okay, so what about sensuality? Like, as society has often said, religion, sensuality, sexuality, these 2 topics is dangerous. You shouldn't go there. And then the kind of free love kind of 1960s was like, yeah, let's all hang out, let's all get naked and be polyamorous with dolphins, like there's that extreme too, right? So there's and there's a way in which that is true. Like it's true from the old school view of it can get you in trouble. Like I could say things right now to you that would get me in trouble. That's probably smart or even kind. And then it can also get you in trouble from a sort of postmodern point of view, where it kind of flips, where female sexuality is now super juicy and liberated, but men are kind of in trouble. So like, maybe let's start at the beginning. The old school was like, sex is bad, sensuality is bad, don't feel your body, do as we say, right?
Yeah, I think that, what happened is I got into working with women because I myself felt like we were still in this place where really the primary focus needed to be for us to balance as a human species is to really work on liberating female sensuality. But really now in the last few years, there's been so many developments in our world where I've actually now gotten really passionate about also understanding the male perspective and what's coming up for men around them starting to feel like we need to pull back and be completely asexual because it's the only way to feel safe.
Yes. So there was a lot of slut shaming originally, and that was mostly aimed at women, mostly by other women, to be fair, but also mostly aimed at women. And you'll still see that, like when I work in Russia, for example, they'll still see this old school kind of slut shaming going on there. Though it's if there's slut shaming, maybe the male equivalent would be mutt shaming. That's what we should call it, mutt shaming. So it's like calling men dogs if they're kind of sensual, they have any kind of sexual urges. And that's become, like I saw an article yesterday which said smart male politicians don't even let women in the room with them anymore. Like
so this is problematic, right? Because what's happening is there's such an extreme response, again, because of fear. And I think that the key right now, and this is like, it's going to take a while for most people to get on board with this, but here's what I feel. I feel like we need to start to come to a place where we get together and we have these conversations where we are understanding what are the new agreements, because we had been living in a world where there was a lot of this is okay for men to do, and these are sort of the rules, and men got it and they were like, cool, this is how it goes. And now those rules have changed, so everyone's freaking out. But the key is like, we don't, as women, are not going to benefit if our men don't want to like date or have sex. Right? That's not helpful.
There'll be complaints when you have to do the job men have been doing for the last few hundred years. Like if you have to be emotionally vulnerable and sexually escalate, then there's going to be all kinds of complaints. I mean, I've seen it in Sweden, it's pathetic.
Yeah. So I think the key is, again, with everything, what I'm noticing is it's just that it's about balancing it out. Right. So what happens is we keep tipping the scales one way or the other. And at some point we're going to come to a place where we find that perfect ground of integration, both within ourselves of how much yin and yang, how much masculine, feminine, alpha, omega, however you call it, for whatever works for you. And at the same time, between ourselves and the rest of the world or the person that we are in relationship with. So I think it's just that we've had hundreds of years where there's been so much of a focus one way that we're just tipping the scales. But of course the answer is not like, the whole idea of like the future is female. It's like, no, it isn't. Like, what's that about? The future, and what I keep saying is the future is embodied union, both within ourselves and externally. We need to come together, and it's through embodiment. Because the more, if you think about it, why is there so much fear and confusion happening around this conversation? It's because people are not embodied, both the men and the women. And so nonverbal communication is being skipped. And it's like, well, of course it's not sexy to talk about all of it. And if we're going to have a situation where we work with nonverbal communication, we actually have to be in our bodies to be able to pick up on what the other person's body is saying. Because there's times where the other body, why is there so much gray area? It's because men haven't been able to pick up on what women's bodies are actually telling them. And women are confused as well because they're not sure what their bodies are saying. Am I a yes? Am I a no? I'm not sure. I guess I'm going to go with this. And then afterwards, whoopsies, I didn't really want this.
Yes, that's the regret conversation, isn't it? And the sort of conversation of men learning to respect boundaries, but also women learning to set them. And that predisposes the basic gender setup of men escalating sexually. But there's two skill sets involved there, aren't there, for sure?
Yeah. And everyone just has to do their work. I want to acknowledge we have been in a system where things have been skewed a little bit one way or the other, but ultimately there's so much that we are all suffering from because of the system we live in that really does value mind over body.
Yes.
Or the idea of like, go, do, as opposed to just feel.
Well, where you have a pretty different perspective, because as I understood it, Lebanon was a very liberal place. and then it kind of switched into being something else. And you've also lived in the States, in Canada. Like I was just in Dubai last week. I have a student from Saudi Arabia that I'm working with in Dubai, a woman, and they've got pretty different perspectives on some of these conversations is what I'm coming across.
Yeah, I mean, having worked in so many different places with so many different cultures that have so many different ways of looking at this, I feel like I'm personally, my soul, whatever, my essence is very, very liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think because I've seen so many different perspectives, it's actually easier for me to be that bridge and for me to see like, oh, hey, I get how this person really, truly believes this and thinks this is the answer. And I can also see how on this other side, it's like this. And ultimately, we all really want to just get to a place of understanding and hot sex. Like, who doesn't, right?
All
And
want to get to a
so,
place of understanding hot sex. That's a great quote. That's
that's that's like all that really matters.
sign up.
Yeah. So hopefully we can figure out how to do it.
Nice. Okay. So on the show, we've had people talk about women's cycles, menstruation, childbirth, breastfeeding, but I don't think any, these are sort of issues that women have, areas that women are interested in perhaps, but no one's talked about women's embodiment as a sort of whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like as far as I can remember on the show. So when you say you're a women's embodiment coach, what does that mean as opposed to simply being an embodiment coach who works with women? Is it the same thing? Is it just your embodiment coach and women are your clients in the same way as like executives could be your clients? Or does it mean something different to say you're a women's embodiment coach?
It is different. So basically what I do is I'm working with these messages that initially when I first started this embodiment coaching, I thought was only messages towards women and the feminine body. Mm-hmm. Now in this last year, there's been this epiphany of like, wait, hold on, there's actually a parallel for men. But I think the difference is that for women, so I work a lot with different feminine archetypes, which because it's like your warrior queen, your sensual siren, your inner little girl. Like some of those are that we have a male counterpart, but the way in which men or anyone who really identifies as primarily masculine essence versus someone who primarily identifies as feminine with feminine essence, which isn't really connected to, your body.
It is connected. It's just not completely connected. I'm going to jump in and challenge you there. To say it's not connected is just ludicrous looking at around the world. Come on, let's not get crazy about this. It's connected. Right. It's just not complete.
It's not exactly the same thing. Connection. Right. Correct. And so with femininity, and if you are a body of primarily feminine essence, what I have found, and this is still, I'm in the inquiry of this, so I'm open to like any pushback or ideas around this. What I've gathered is that for women, the way to plug in to their bodies is through pleasure.
Okay.
So for men, the way to plug in, or someone of masculine essence, is through power.
Through challenge, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So it's like I lift weights, I go up against my edge, I feel power, I go, whoa, I'm really in touch with myself. Whereas it's quite like if I'm more in my feminine side, I talk about it just internally maybe as well, because it's both, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm in the bath, I'm kind of massaging myself, I'm feeling how hot the water is, I'm really feeling and sensing my skin, noticing myself relax into the bath. Like they're like two fundamentally different strategies. I mean, even in the same person, but we have a preference, and I'm going to choose the weights 9 times out of 10. Like that's a fundamentally different way of getting into our bodies.
Right. And because I had been trained to, like, all my tools coming out of S Factor, that sensual movement that I taught, were for women, and through sensuality and through sensation, I felt most equipped to guide women through this journey. Now, with that said, behind the scenes, I've been working on figuring out how to do it with the men, because ultimately I do want to start to move into,
it's great to have a niche, right, as well. Like, I'm totally not against anyone that says I work with, women, or I work with dwarfs, or I work with, people that are like badgers. It doesn't really, it's okay to niche down into a certain area and get really good with that. Because, I feel like this kind of Scandinavian type narrative of men and women are the same, so they need the same things, just isn't my experience. It's just not. And I've noticed certain issues coming up way more with female students, just so much more. whether it's about belonging or connection or self-esteem stuff. Oh my God, it's different. And maybe like some different modalities. I tend to use both of those modalities in my trainings. And there is definitely men who connect more with that feminine way into embodiment. I tend to sort of say it's a yin method rather than feminine, so they don't get like insulted by that kind of thing, you know.
Right,
But it's like, I love this distinction of these two ways into embodiment. I'm totally going to think about that some more.
Yeah. And, for me, like the reason I was getting into that and starting to figure that one out is because, I go also to ecstatic dance a lot, 5 rhythms, like all these beautiful different modalities of exploratory dance. Right. And I was looking, because these are the places where it is mixed. And I'm just like watching, like, how does everyone plug in? And I'm realizing that in those spaces, first of all, there isn't that much guidance, right? Yes. So it depends. 5 rhythms it depends on what teacher you get, but
Sure.
But especially like something like ecstatic dance, it's just you're going in and you guide yourself. And so a lot of what I found, at least in the cities I've gone to ecstatic dance in, and I have gone throughout the world, I found that the men tended to be of the more feminine, or like the way that they connected with
alternative culture, right? So mainstream culture, exactly. Men are masculine, yang, and women are feminine. And alternative culture, you go to 5 rhythms and the men are a bunch of pussies and the women are kind of a bit butch sometimes. And like that's you're not allowed to say that in America. I know. Don't worry, I said it, not you. You can think it still. Don't worry, I'll set you free. So it's like that happens, and then there's another stage, and like my friend Maria does, she calls it re-Vikinging the men. She's Scandinavian. And then the women get their flow and their femininity back, right? And then they feel guilty about it because feminism says they shouldn't. Wrong?
Well, yeah.
Agree,
and
disagree?
And I think
I'm a horrible person.
I think, no, this is great. I love, these are the conversations that excite me the most, because I think that we are just all like putting ourselves in these prisons. I think that there's a place to be really gender fluid and to be able to find your own unique ratio of yin and yang.
Gender fluid, like I always heard that term. What does it mean? So it means being able to go yin and yang, or it means something else?
Yeah, both. It's for a lot of us, I think, are just, we live still in this like binary world of like, generally you're either a man or a woman. You identify as one or the other, and it is considered alternative, unorthodox to say, I'm just queer. I don't identify as either. I'm not really sure.
What does that mean?
What that means? I don't have that experience, so I can't speak to it. Right. But where you don't identify as,
have that experience. So it's still,
say it again?
99% of people don't have that experience, right? It's still like pretty small percentage, right?
Well, we don't know that because that's the socialization, right? So just yesterday I was speaking to someone who was sharing with me that there are, I know in Native American culture, there's 7 different genders. And then he was telling me, gosh, I forget what other culture, but there's 11 genders. So I think that, and the genders simply mean they're different ratios, of yin to yang.
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about different ratios of yin to yang. So I wouldn't call that a gender myself. I'd say, okay, this person is more yin or this person is more yang. Like, why?
Right, because we don't have language. If we had 11 labels and we could say, oh, I'm label number 7, for example, you know what I mean? So I think it's just a whole different way of like thinking about it. But I agree with you that there is us going too far in one direction or the other is not helping anyone. And I think ultimately, just to take it back to the ecstatic dance, 5 rhythms conversation, when I was watching everyone, I was like, okay, hold on. My class, I actually do a lot more guiding. So the first 20, 30 minutes, I'm holding them with my words, with my invitations. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, how do I speak to both the masculine essence and the feminine essence in terms of, connecting to your muscles, contracting, fueling up your body into that power? And musically also, what do you do to conjure up power versus what are you doing to help with, soften and get more sensual and go into and find what delights you in your body? It's two very different energies. Yes. And so to be able to take someone on a moving meditation throughout the hour and have it be both the men and the women is quite challenging. Yes. Because they women have to go pleasure, then they go up into their power after that.
So I'm going to jump in there because so you do see a difference between people who are biologically male and biologically female and how they relate to embodiment. Like, are you like saying you definitely see there's a pattern there?
I
I would
personally
definitely
do, but
say that I would say the majority of people who identify as women will also identify as having a primarily feminine or yin essence, right? And those who are in a male body or identify as men will, most of them, I don't have a percentage, but
I
just
agree.
based on my experience, would identify as having a masculine essence,
And I think
which
this is
does.
worth saying because this is actually not very politically correct, what you're saying. You're
I
saying
just,
the majority.
yeah, well, I have a lot of teachers. I do a lot of work in the David data world, which gets a lot
Yes.
of flack
Yes.
around being too hetero and too backwards and archaic. And
Mhm.
I think that there's a place where we can meet in the middle, because the truth is, all of that work, I used to be, listen, when I first got into embodiment, and I was like, oh, feminist, like really intellectual. I did a lot of feminist and women's studies in my undergrad years. And so I was very like, what do you mean? This, da, 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 da. Like I was so not into it. And then over time, I started to work with the tools in my own romantic relationship and with my body. And I was like, there's something to this that's really true. And so I think that it works for quite a good chunk of people.
Mhm.
And I think it may not work for some people. And
Yes.
the key is to just, to just work with like, hey, what am I? Am I 60-40? Am I 70-30? Whatever it might be. And just own that. And it doesn't matter what, whether you're a man or woman.
What are you? What percentage?
Percentage.
Come on, you said good percentages. I want to hear it.
I think it's also where you are. Like, so for me, when I show up in my work,
Yes.
right, I have I would say I'm about 60 or 70% masculine.
Uh-huh.
If I'm as a coach, when I show up on a call, I have to be the container. I have to hold it all together. I have to make sure we get done on time. Those are very masculine traits.
Uh-huh.
And at the same time, I have to be connected and intuitive and receiving and empathic and feeling what the other person's feeling. So I still have to bring some of my feminine. Now,
Uh-huh.
when I show up, for my partner, I've been called out on this quite a few times. In my last relationship, it was like, you're showing up like a dude right now, and it's
Yeah.
just not turning me on at all. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. Right. And so what do I need to do to drop in? Because I am primarily a feminine essence when I'm not running my own business. And I do, and here's a very simple way that one of my teachers, John Wineland, refers to it. He says, if you feel like if your primary yearning and desire is to want to be ravished, this is in the more romantic realm, is to be ravished, then you are primarily a feminine essence. And that could be a guy, right? If you are the person wanting to ravish, you're primarily of masculine essence. And so I think just asking yourself that question, knowing there's no right or wrong about which one you identify with, but that's a really, that's one way to sort
Interesting
of
word, ravish, isn't it? I think it's a stand-in for less polite words. Like, what does that mean?
ravish. It's to be taken.
That doesn't. Is there consent there? How does
You so
ravish? How do you ravish someone in a post-Me Too world?
Right. Oh, that's such a great question.
Get a
Thank
form
you so
filled
much.
out first, right?
Yes. Step 1, we all need to get embodied. Step 2, we need to go and have safe spaces where we work in an immersed embodied experience to start to understand each other's nonverbal communication. And I think step 3 is, depending on your unique situation, it's still good to have like an actual verbal conversation ahead of time where there's a clear identification of like, this is a no, when I do this, this is a no, or whatever agreements you want to come across and decide on. But ultimately, if you speak to a lot of women, this is like me and my girlfriends have been talking about this like lately. We're just like, okay, how do we upfront make it clear? Hey, you have permission. Like here's like, you need to trust that I will say no when it's time.
Yes.
But the problem is there's distrust now, because now a lot of the men are going, wait a second, hold on. You never said no. And now you're like reporting about it, I don't know how many years later. And this is not the woman's fault either, because she was in a world where no one believed her. And where there is also in our nervous system, every time we want to speak up, we need to remember that sometimes, a lot of women come to me and they say, I literally feel like it's a life or death situation when I want to speak my truth, even when it's a low stakes scenario, not when it's in bed. And the reason for that is because genetically in our DNA, we have so many stories from like our mom, our grandma, our great grandma, there's still some sort of imprint in our own DNA around it is not safe to speak your truth, because back then it was a matter of life and death. You could actually be killed.
It's the same for men. That men would be killed by the king. That's a nonsense story. Like, I can challenge you on this, because every man in history, unless you were the king of England, could get his head, feudal Japan, you get your head chopped off for not bowing deep enough, male or female. So how is that?
Yeah, but it's not, men weren't the ones that had to go, oh, this really hurts.
I don't know what you mean. How's that relevant?
Like when you're having sex or whatever, right? Like it's to just suddenly, to actually speak something that really doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Like guys are not, like if something doesn't feel good, like guys don't have a problem being like, hey, this doesn't feel great, because they don't have history of this being a problem. Also, like women saying, going to the police, like I still live in Lebanon. If you go and report anything, you bet you're going to be going to the jail for prostitution.
Yes, I mean, the Middle East is way worse, and I think that needs to be in most of the Middle East, I should say. Like Israel's an exception, obviously, but there are different cultures, and there are different places that are better or worse than this. And this notion that all women have grown up under this awful patriarchy where all men were fine and men didn't have any trauma and women were being oppressed, and now we're having to get over that, and that's the narrative. I think it doesn't really look at the reality of history, where most men were equally horribly oppressed.
Well, I wouldn't say equally, but I think that there's
two medieval peasants, one's male, one's female, pretty equally oppressed or not? Just as a concrete example.
I think that it's worse for women, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's about social status and economic status. And then there's a whole nother level that's about biology, right? So I think that here's the thing. Ultimately, what I see is happening is there's a divisiveness and a like fighting over, I'm more oppressed, this happens.
You're right.
And I think that we can acknowledge that there's truth to all of it, and that everyone's had these trauma. Of course, by no means am I saying that men don't have their own set of trauma. And right now that trauma is increasing. But I think that ultimately we can recognize that we all have our own truths and our own experiences, and then work within that to really listen to, well, what do you need? And what do I need? And how can we do it in a way that's sexy?
Yes, we don't I'm with you on that basic sense of like, hey, let's communicate. Let's not play the oppression Olympics. Let's actually really try and get sexy again, because actually that's what both groups want. And where I'm pushing back is the notion you've taken on that like women have been historically oppressed and men haven't. Like, 95% of the people who died in World War I were male, right? So that's a huge trauma all the way across Europe. Most of the people dying in the Middle East now are male.
Yeah, there's a huge argument that when it comes to the value of life, and this is something that I will speak to, and I absolutely don't identify with this group because they're incredibly super intense. But the male rights movement in the U.S. I just was watching a documentary on them recently, and I went in and I was like, oh, this is going to be just like, this is a hate group and they're just awful and and there was some really interesting pieces. That doesn't mean that I'm like suddenly going to go join, they have the honey badgers, which is like the women who love them.
Honey badgers?
Yeah. I'm not suddenly a honey badger, but there's some things that they brought up that I thought were really interesting. One of which is, and I totally agree with them on this point, which is that they're like, men's lives have been valued historically as less than women and children, which is true, right? Every time it's like if the plane crashes, men are like, women and children go first.
Yes.
War, women and children shouldn't be harmed. And I thought about this. I was like, wow, I've never, ever thought about this.
Every Hollywood movie you ever see, men getting shot left, right, and center. Very rare for a woman to be killed unless it's to prove that someone's evil.
Right. And, this is all very new for me, and I've been sitting with it. And my thoughts are, maybe it's because the woman's body, like, is the one that gives birth. And so they feel this is what they need. Like, it's like we've been valued as higher because that's how to continue the species. Honestly, I don't know. But it's a very interesting point. And I think there's a lot of other points as to how men have it really, really difficult. But I do think it's also the fault of the system, a system that is really moving us away from compassionate understanding and listening, moving us away from being and feeling and being heart-based, and moving us more towards go, 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 be really individualistic, get shit done,
Okay, I don't want to be like the male Kathy Newman to you here.
I don't
So
know who she is.
she interviewed Jordan Peterson, and it was embarrassing. Gave him a hard time. I think there's something I like to push a little bit on some things I don't disagree with, but also feel like you're here as a guest, and I really want to give you that platform to speak what you want to speak. So, what should male and female embodiment teachers understand about female embodiment? Like, maybe what am I missing? As a guy who's working in embodiment, half my students, at least, maybe more, are women. Like, hey, what could I be missing here? I could have some major blind spots.
What I found, and it surprises me, but what continues to be the deepest wound is really around connecting to your inner little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I don't have a therapy background. I know there's so much like inner child work that's always been really effective in that realm. So maybe it's because that's the age where so much of our shit got, basically written into our nervous system. But I find that whenever we go there, that's where the most effective and efficient work gets done. So I think whenever you get a chance to get people back into the feeling of what is it like to be in their childlike bodies, there's something that opens. And I think it might be through the heart, something connected to the heart, that really creates space for so much healing that even I'm still figuring out. I'm like, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but it's working. So great.
What's stuff that I might be missing? Because like, as an embodiment teacher, I think I was really slow to pick up on some of the differences. And I started going, oh shit, like a lot of women have some self-esteem stuff going on that I've never had. And I think most guys have never had. Like a sense of insecurity, a sense of wanting to belong to the point where they don't want to stand up for themselves, because it's like those boundaries are bad. Like you talked about this in a sexual context. I'm seeing that in all kinds of contexts. And there's certain issues that I went, okay, wow, this does seem to be massively skewed over the female side of my students. After, thousands of students, I started to see the pattern. And I think I was pretty slow to wake up to some of that stuff. And I'm, painfully aware now that despite everything, we just got a bit heated there before, but actually like I can have some real blind spots here as a male teacher. So what do you think, like a lot of male teachers who are teaching conscious dance or, martial arts, I know loads of martial art teachers that just don't realize how common sexual assault against women is. They just have no idea that most of their class have been grabbed and groped and blah, blah, blah. So like, what are some of the things as male embodiment teachers we might want to be a bit more aware of?
I think just even in you speaking to the fact that you observed a pattern means that there's some sort of truth to the fact that there is something historically in our system that has discouraged women from speaking up. If boundaries, for me, the same themes come up with the women. It's like, we work on their boundaries. We work on, it's all throat chakra, everything about self-expression, truth.
Yes.
And second chakra, which is all about, pleasure, creativity, and sexuality. Those are the two that just keep coming up over and over again, that are the weakest, or there's the least connection to.
Developed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
guys, it might be more the heart area, do you think? Or like
100%.
A slightly 100%. Different leaning there. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely heart, because there's so much like man up and don't cry. And, the only emotion that's allowed is anger.
Yeah, well, that's it's hilarious just being in the Middle East and seeing what emotions aren't allowed, but most of them for men, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're not allowed to be sad. You can be happy at the football.
But here's what's interesting about the Middle East. I was just speaking to my roommate about this last night. The men from the Middle East, great lovers, because they're connected to that warrior energy. Well, they will ravish.
I've heard, though, I say great lovers. I've heard mixed reviews, shall we say. I mean, granted, I hear that. The other thing I hear is like, they'll fuck the hell out of you, but there's no sensitivity. So now,
right. So that's the more extreme. That's taking the warrior to the extreme, right? Because you want both. You want to have that like primal sexuality, but you also want to have heart and sensitivity and connection to the nuances. And so again, we come back to this place of everything's about balance and everything is about connecting. Here's the thing. How do we empower people? We have to be able to have them be in spaces where they feel safe to take on and explore these different energies inside of them, whether it's warrior, whether it's heart-based, whether it is sensuality, and, suave, mystery, dude,
Yes.
charmer, whatever. And so lots of times we get stuck in one or two of these energies, and there are primary energies, and we like function through life in those energies. But if we can create classes and workshops where people can go and play with these like quote unquote costumes, which aren't really costumes, they're part of who you are,
Yes.
but you just haven't, like, your capacity, that muscle to connect hasn't been used in a while. So you have to like go back to doing exercises. And then over time, as you build that muscle, you're able to flow in and out of these different energies and call on them whenever you need to, and have that right balance that feels unique to you.
I mean, this
But
is
I think we
basic.
don't have that.
Yeah, I see this as the fundamental personal growth equation. We call it awareness, range, and choice. So there's the awareness of my patterns, like, okay, I tend towards the warrior. That's a pattern for me. And then range, like, hey, maybe I actually want to build some range. Like I was working on some sort of feminine yin kind of yoga this morning to build some range. And then you have a choice, right? And you can build those muscles through practice and develop those different ways of being, first maybe as more like a costume, and then later as a sort of deeper aspect of who you are.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're also, as a woman, if you're like fully in your sensual or fully in your play, like you were saying, that happens, people get too unfocused. It's not good for anyone.
No, I've met women that done too much David data, and they're like, I'm in my chaos, and if you can't handle it, you're not man enough, and they're just a fucking nightmare. So the 4 pillars of embodiment, I understand you work with. What are the four pillars of embodiment in your system?
So the 4 pillars are basically what I call the seeds of safety is the first pillar. And this is really about increasing your capacity to self-regulate. So this is all about nervous system and safety. And like, to me, this is the foundational piece, because a lot of people, the women come to me and they're like, I want to feel more vibrant and sexy and da, 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 da. And I'm like, that's great. But guess what? The first section of our work is actually going to be very unsexy, because it's about mothering your inner little girl. And it's about learning how your nervous system functions, learning when you're in trigger, learning what tools you need to get yourself back to a place of self-regulation. Because as long as you can't do that, you can't get into your sensual.
Yeah,
right?
So this is something I learned about women as a teenager. They have to feel really safe and relaxed to be turned on. And that's not true about men. I can get a hard on with a gun to my head. It's like actually men's sex drive increases when they're in war zones. This is one reason there's a lot of sexual violence in wars. Whereas with women, it's like the last thing, right? People need to feel chill. They need to be relaxed. And then they get juicy. Like it's like a different order, I think. Like you're talking about safe spaces. Actually, as a man doing work, the last thing I want to be is in a safe space. Fuck that. A safe space is nowhere interesting to me at all. Like, but I get why for women you're stressing that.
That's such an interesting, that's so cool to hear. I wondered, would you feel the same way around if it was about connecting to your heart? So if you were trying to increase your capacity to connect to your emotions and your heart, would you then, because that's more of a feminine energy, would you then want to be in a safe space, or does it feel totally cool to try to do that at the grocery store?
Yeah, great question. I think this, when you say safe, if you mean non-abusive, then absolutely. If you mean boundaried with a degree of authority and predictability and kindness, absolutely. If you mean non-confrontational, no way. Like I reading my dad's eulogy was one of the ways I most got in contact with my heart last year. That wasn't like a nice, gooey, that was an extreme situation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I want to think about that one though. That's a really good question.
Me too.
I'm going to go away and think about that. I love it when I'm in an interview and I go, oh, I don't know. Okay, let me go think about that. I could give you like a try answer now, but often what happens in these interviews is I listen to them back when they're released, and then I've had like 2 months to think about them. And I go, oh, I've got a different point of view now 2 months later,
cool.
I get to listen to everyone twice, one when I'm doing them and when it's released, I always listen to it back. And often I've kind of, maybe I'll give you an email then because I've got kind of the process ticks through,
Yeah, me too. Yeah, cool. So okay, so back to the pillars of embodiment. So we've got seeds of safety, right, is number 1. The second one is about awakening your Aphrodite. That's what I call it. And that's about increasing your capacity for turn on, for pleasure. It's all about getting into that yummy, delicious energy, which is really sort of like what pulls people into this work.
Yes.
Then we move into flowing with your feminine. And this is something that, you brought up a little bit earlier, where I work with women on what it's like to be a cyclical being, both, within our cycle throughout the month. What is it like? How can you support yourself and nurture yourself in the best way? What are the best way? What skills are, because you have superpowers each week of the month as a woman, but we just get taught like we have 2 gears. I'm bleeding. I'm not.
So that's really nice. So I just point listeners to Julia Davis's episode on bleed yoga. But this is really nice. So you're actually seeing it as superpowers at each point, not like there's like a bad bit you want to try and avoid.
There's always a bad bit.
Right. So
there's always like light and shadow, right?
Plus and a minus, right? Like here I'm energized, but I'm maybe scattered. And here I'm good at being critical, and that's useful sometimes, but maybe it's overcritical. Is that kind of what you mean when you say like?
Yeah. And it's like, so there's times of the month where you're better at pitching and presenting. There's times when you're better at meditating and being intuitive and reflecting. There's times when you're better at creating plans and strategies. And so no one teaches this at school to women.
This is like astounding to guys. I don't think women realize how confusing this is to men. Like my wife can say one thing and feel one thing, and then an hour later, not even a day, an hour later, for no reason, for no discernible, she's changed her mind.
Right.
Like you don't understand. Like for no reason, just like an hour later, or for a million reasons maybe. Like she'll say one thing and then something else, like an hour later. Like she'll want to have sex with me, and then she won't, and then she will again.
Right. I can't speak to the experience of your wife. I have no idea what's going on.
Terrifying. I mean, I'm hamming it up here, but I'm really trying to get across the point of view that actually this is unusual to us. Like if I want to fuck someone on Tuesday, I want to fuck them on Thursday. Like there isn't a cycle 2 days later for me where I've changed my mind. Like that is confusing to men.
Yeah, I think it's and what's challenging for women is that we live in a world that expects you to show up the same every day.
Right. So
you're supposed to, 6 a.m. you go to the gym, by 8 you're at the office, then you're doing this and da. And the truth is our bodies as women are not built that way. And so, in certain cultures that maybe are skewed a little bit more matriarchal, there's still a little bit of energy of, okay, maybe women aren't full on red tenting, which means, they take a week to actually all go and bleed together on the new moon.
Let's just envisage that. And imagine a company with like 2,000 people working in a big building in LA or San Diego where you are, and they're all women and they're all in sync. And like, there's a certain period where they're in that company where there's a rhythm, and maybe certain days they sleep in or sleep less. Maybe they do all their like HR reviews on a certain day. Maybe they do all their like collective teamwork on another day. Maybe they like fire everyone on a particular day. Like, what would that be like in a modern context? And that's a fascinating idea.
I think it's really cool, to be honest, because I think then you're working more. I really imagine this like amoeba of like, that's just like, I don't know, there's just something where we're all in sync. I know that it's happening in smaller pockets, like in the more personal growth world, where we are all somehow sunk up because we are more connected to the seasons. And so most of my friends will bleed. We all bleed on the new moon. So we're all sunk up, even if we don't live in the same place. And so I feel, even within my little bubbles of other coaches and teachers and healers, that we are sort of pacing ourselves at the same time. Like, oh yeah, this week we're not going to do our whatever call because we're all bleeding, or, so there's many versions of that already appearing. And I actually hope that it will continue. I don't think this is a bad thing at all, because it connects us to nature. And this is another piece, we've been so part of disembodiment and the consequence of disembodiment. If you are rejecting yourself, you are rejecting nature. Because our bodies, our primal animal bodies, are part of nature. And so as a result, we see we're leaving a legacy behind of really not doing a great job with the planet.
And there's men still have the seasons away in a way. Like this winter, it's December. I don't really feel like working so hard. There's natural cycles that we had supposed to all work through December as if it was the same as August. That makes no sense.
Totally.
It's dark here in England right now. And listen, we are at the end of our little cycle here for an hour, so we need to kill this one. A couple of things then to finish. This has been fun. It's been playful. It's been sensual. I think you've been very patient with my slightly aggressive style at times. So I appreciate that deeply. And I also think a couple of times at least we modeled what you were talking about of like going, oh, that's interesting. And actually going, let's listen to each other. And let's, oh, okay, I never thought about that. Like, and I think there's hope if people like me and you can still do this. You know, maybe men and women don't have to go live in separate countries, you know. And
that would be so sad.
Would it be sad? But sometimes nice too. Anyway, so just for a week. Okay, so 2 things to finish. 1, where can people find out more about your work, Nadia?
So I'm at nadiamunla.com. It's just my full name. And everything regarding Embody, the dance class that me and a bunch of teachers teach, is at embodydanceclass.com. Embody
with EMBODY, yeah?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, and a final message about the body.
Be good to it.
As good as any. Why not? Keep it simple. Okay, Thank you. Shukran. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know like so much is available for free now. And, you know, what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. You know, Maud and I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.